This is Surah Balad, chapter 90 of the Holy Quran. And I have recited to you verses 12 to 17. And their English translation is, what will make you understand what the uphill road is? The uphill road is to free a slave or to feed in a day of hunger and often nearly related, or the poor man lying in the dust. Thus, then, he is of those who believe and exhort one another to patience and exhort one another to mercy. You will see that doing of good in this chapter of the Holy Quran is regarded as an uphill struggle. And earlier on, God says that I have shown you two paths. One is a hard one, a difficult one, and one is the easy one. And then it gives examples of what that uphill struggle is. And the first of these is to free a slave. There is a misconception in the world today, and that is that slavery has disappeared and that it no longer exists. But slavery is of two types. There is physical slavery, where you go and you pay some money and you own that person's body. Interestingly enough, if you do a calculation of how much a slave on one of the American plantations cost at the time of or just before the American Civil War, today's figure would be about $50,000. And yet today you can buy a human being. Yes, I do mean you can actually buy a human being, a slave, for $50. This is how human life has degraded in value. But slavery is of two types. There is, of course, physical slavery, but then there is also mental slavery. And that is that you enslave someone by degrading them, by humiliating them. And you enslave them with threats. It may be threats of violence against themselves, or it may be threats that if they leave, then their children will starve. Where will they find the food? How will they pay their rent? All of this is slavery. Anything that means that people have to live in some kind of bondage is slavery. It will astonish you to know that at this point in time in the whole world, the total number of slaves is actually greater than the slaves throughout the world at the time that the slavery was more common. There are nearly 30 million people in this world who are living in slavery. See, when we talk about slavery, let us look at what was happening, for example, in Victorian times. In Victorian times, you even had children who were slaves. Children were sent down coal mines, and they would have to work 12 to 18 hours a day. Now, why were children used? Because then you did not have to dig such a large hole to get a person in to dig out the coal. For a fully grown man, obviously, you need a much bigger hole. He's certainly going to be over 5 foot, perhaps even 6 foot. So that's the size of the hole that you need. But if you use a child who's 8 or 9 or 10, then you only need to dig a hole that is as high as that child. And that's saved the mine owners money. And that meant they made more profit. Then you had chimney sweeps. This was children who were sent down chimneys to clean them with their elbows and their feet. It will astonish you to know how old these children were. The youngest was 3 years old. A 3 years old will be sent down this chimney to clean it with his hands, with his heels, and with his elbows. And this constant friction, this constant rubbing of their heels and their elbows caused them to lose all skin on those parts of their body. And then there were children who worked in factories, who would work from Monday to Saturday, and who would start work at 6 a.m. and finish at 8 p.m. 14 hours a day of labor. It wasn't until 1875 that when a boy called George Burrow, I think his name was killed in a chimney, that laws were passed. It wasn't until 1891 that the Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Children was formed. What will astonish you to learn is this, that about 67 years before that, in 1824, the Society for Cruelty for Prevention to Animals was created. So children had less value, certainly less economic value in the eyes of people of this country. Now, has that changed? Well, it has changed in Britain and in America and so on. In these countries, you no longer have children slaving in factories. In these countries, as I said, in 1881, Thomas Agnew created the Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Children. But let's look at the rest of the world. Let's see what the situation there is. You see, slavery is anything. It may be bonded labor. You go and borrow some money from a person, and he says, well, you have to come and work in my factory or on my farm or wherever else it may be until that loan is paid off. But generations pass. The son carries on after the father because even the interest is not paid off. And then the grandson carries on after his father. But let alone the capital, even the interest is not being paid off. If it means you have to live and work on someone's farm, this is called serfdom. You have other types of slavery, which is you're trafficked from some poor country into a Western country or North American country, and the employer takes away your passport. So you're forced to work at that place. You cannot leave. Because if you're stopped or if you're arrested, you cannot prove your identity. You have no means of proving your identity. But then, you may have slavery of another kind, where people are kept in captivity for domestic work. As we heard on the news last week, or perhaps it was the week before. And then we have the child slavery in exactly the same way as we had in Britain in Victorian days. And of course, and people always forget this, there is also marital and sexual slavery, and that includes forced marriages and forcing even wives to have conjugal relations against their consent. All of this is slavery. And I will take just one example out of that. And that is work in the factories. Because the subject is so big that hours can be spent discussing it, debating it, talking about it. But I want to concentrate on one type of slavery in which those countries that beat the drum of freedom so loudly are complicit. And that is forced labor. That is psychological slavery. That is mental slavery. We have manufacturers in the West, household famous names, who subcontract work to third world countries, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, China. And there was a television program where a reporter went to one of these factories, and there they stitched footballs. And each football, if you went into a sports store in the UK, would be selling for £150. And they were being stitched by children. And when the manager of that company was asked, "Isn't this cruel?" he gave a very good reply. He said, "Go and ask the company that gave me the contract for stitching these." He said, "They keep on driving the price. They keep on driving the price." All these brilliant businessmen, are they so innocent of facts? Are they so innocent of economic factors of this country that they don't realize that an adult could not work and feed his family on those wages? He said they know full well that children are doing it. But when they are coming to audit our factories, they inform us. We are coming to your country. We are going to live in a 19-star hotel. We are going to hire a limousine. And then on day X at time Y, we are going to come to your factory to make sure the children are not working. And he said, are they stupid or am I stupid? Why do you think they're doing it? They're doing it because they want to give me a chance to make sure that on the day they come, they can't see any children, so that they can go back and report to the board, oh, I personally visited that factory and there were no children there. Because they can't be seen to be lying. There was a factory in Bangladesh which was subcontracted to make clothes for garment industry. And I'm not talking about Petticoat Lane, and I'm not talking about Sunday markets, and I'm not talking about cheap stuff. I'm talking about well-known brands, designer brands, which are highly sought after in this country. And this factory, or a number of these factories, were investigated by a television program. And they went and they sat outside the factory and they videoed. They videoed these people who went into factory at 6 in the morning. And in one instance, they showed this person going home at 2 a.m. He arrived at 6, so he must have left his home half an hour early. He must have got up half an hour earlier than that. And he was leaving that factory at 2 a.m. So he was going to get 2 hours sleep that night. And when they went in, and when they saw the sign-out sheets, that person had only done 8.5 hours. And the director who signed the contract said, well, I saw this sheet. It was signed. It said 8.5 hours. What do you expect me to do? Well, I expect you to resign. Really? If you are so stupid, sir, that you cannot see that these sheets are fabricated, but then, of course, you're not stupid. You're clever. You don't want to have to lie to the British press, or British media, or British television. You want to be able to say, I went there, I didn't see any children. I've seen documentation. They only work 8 hours a day, and they get overtime if they work anymore. And even if they work overtime, it's never more than 4 hours a day, so that they can get proper food and rest. Did you know that in these factories, there are not even toilets? Did you know that these factories in India, Pakistan and Bangladesh, drinking water is not available? Did you know that in these factories, workers are harassed to an extent that they commit suicide? Because there is no way out. They are told day in, day out, this is the only factory. If you leave us, if you don't do what we tell you to do, then you lose your job. Or you may say to him, well, I don't own you. You can leave this place, but of course you know, if you leave this place, you'll never get another job. Your children are going to starve to death. What kind of freedom is that? That is slavery as much as those black people from Africa who were purchased and transported to Europe and to North America. There's no difference. The difference is merely in semantics. It's just in semantics. There are no slaves. What do you mean? You didn't go out and pay for someone's body. But the virtual situation you have created, the circumstances you have created is that however badly you treat that person cannot leave you. But what is slavery? What else do you need for something to be classified as slavery? as we saw in the case of these ladies who were incarcerated in this flat in London. And isn't it interesting that the Holy Quran says that the uphill road, the first thing is to free a slave. The second thing is to help your relatives who are poor. And the third thing is to help anyone who is poor. So what the Quran is saying, if you can't free these people, at least pay them properly. It doesn't mean that you cook a pot of palau and you take it round their house and you sit there and you put it in a plate and you put them into your mouth. It means you give them the means and the resources to satisfy the needs of their families. And unfortunately, because you see, what has happened is that the profit motive, bare, naked, unashamed capitalism, has taken over the world since the collapse of communism. And communism was bound to collapse. There is no competing philosophy. There is nothing saying, well, if you live your lives in this way, if you organize your country in this way, you will have a better life. This is why manufacturers, this is why companies in the Western world have a free hand, they have free rein to terrorize. There is no other word for it. To terrorize the poor workers of third world countries who have no choice but to work for these mean and meager wages. So they are as much slaves of these Western companies. They are as much slaves of Mex and Puma and Marks and Spencer's and O'Neill and Primark and all the other companies as those slaves who worked the American plantations. And they will not be free. In our own countries, they will not be free. Until those countries where Muslims are in a majority learn to read the Holy Quran, not recite it like a parrot, but read it and understand it and implement its messages so that they provide a solution to the problems that face them. And one of the biggest problems that they face is exploitation of their people by Western companies who make enormous profits, which are then distributed as dividends to the rich in the West so that they can have private health insurance. Their kids can go to posh schools and their children can wear designer clothes and designer shoes and wear designer glasses. Surely, those who are being exploited are also human beings. They too have children. They too have families. They too want them to be educated. They too want them to be fed properly and clothed properly, even if not in designer clothes. It is for Muslims to stand up and at least protect the people in their own countries from becoming slaves to Western profit motive and capitalism.